subject is experimental design. So I'm Miss Melanie Gigurat, and let's talk about the purpose of experimental research. Our main objective is to describe the purpose of experimental research designs. And here are some of the characteristics of experimental research. So it is considered the most powerful research methodology. It is the best way in cause and effect researches, and it is actually considered the most difficult. So that's difficult. It's the most difficult to conduct. And we have actually two very important aspects unique about experimental research. So we can directly influence a particular variable. And as mentioned in our description, so we mentioned there that it is used for cost and effect problems or researches. So it can now search for some influences of some variable, particularly independent variable to, of course, dependent variable. It is also considered as a best type for testing hypothesis. And let us also consider the uniqueness of experimental research. So it affects at least one independent variable or one or more dependent variable. So as mentioned again, so actually the characteristics, what is unique about our experimental research, or what are the two important aspects, are all because of it can test the cause and effect relationship. So it involves dependent variables and independent variables. So for our dependent variables, we are familiar that usually if we will conduct action researches, dependent variables for action researches are the performance of the students, achievement, or it can also be in a way that if we target the variable like attitude, it can also be that attitude can be dependent variable. So our independent variable now are what are the things that we will use or we will control, we will plan to use in our conduct of action research. It can be the different learnings, the different interventions, like are you going to use cooperative learning? Uh, will you use some games, trivia in your intervention? So will you control now that the number of students involved or the number of students in your class will be limited into 20 students only? How many members of a group will be there in each group of each group that will be included in your cooperative learning experiment? So those are just examples of dependent and independent variables in your experimental research, or particularly in action research. And then, of course, researcher can manipulate the independent variables. So as mentioned, it is now the plan of the researcher, which is the teacher, how to manipulate now the independent variable in such a way that it will not be affected by the different threats of internal and external validity of your research. And then third, in experimental research, the treatments are administered in the class. So we are actually talking about here educational experimental research. So the experimental research that we are discussing is the treatment that are administered inside the class. So the teacher needs to conduct the study. He or she will, of course, deliver now the intervention. It can be any interventions as proposed or as planned in doing the action, the research. Okay, so thank you for Listen